Travail continue. On va continuer à faire notre travail. We're going to continue working. Our job is not yet done.
50% tariff levied on those items that you just saw on that full screen ahead of you a few seconds ago. Motor vehicles, alcohol, dairy products, hockey sticks, cement. And it's because of the U.S. allegations that Canada is not treating certain imports like, autos, dairies from the United States side very fairly. And again, this is being levied under what they call Section 338, which is a law that allows the U.S. to levy these tariffs if they find that a foreign country is discriminating.
Canada and the United States are in the final stretch before Wednesday. No deal yet. So, instead of just watching the clock, here are the 3 ways this ends and what Canada does next.
So what's Canada going to do if these tariffs kick in?
Well, great question. The Prime Minister has made pretty clear so far that all options are on the table. Although if I was a betting person, I think he, made some comments about a week ago suggesting a lesser likelihood that natural resource exports, for example, are used as a key bargaining chip here, i.e. with export tariffs being put on them to rise costs for Americans. But in general, we can expect that if we don't reach a deal, that there is some sort of suite of potentially retaliatory options, as well as new and extra supports for these affected Canadian sectors that are going to be
a short extension. The tariffs get paused, and both sides keep talking. It is the most common Trump-era ending.
If they find that a foreign country is discriminating against them. But again, we've seen this playbook before just about a year ago when the United States levied tariffs on Canada and then ultimately backed off of them. So this is very much going to be a part of the discussion as the U.S. and Canada do try to negotiate some sort of new agreement, Christine.
Representatives being, concerned and exercised and voicing those concerns to the administration.
So as the clock ticks down here, what do you see as sort of the best case scenario that they're probably game playing right now for Canada?
Well, absolute best case scenario would be getting to a place of not imposing 50% tariffs and lifting the sectoral tariffs that were previously introduced, steel, aluminum, automotives, lumber products. We're not clear if that's going to happen. An alternative is we get to at least an interim deal or...
In way 3, no deal. The full 50% hits hundreds of Canadian goods at midnight.
Trading partner because of proximity, of course. There are neighbors to the north. And when you think about specifically automotive products, if this tariff does come to pass, this would override exemptions on previous rounds of tariffs and would impose that 50% tariff on what is a huge industry. That is the automotive industry between the U.S. and Canada. That could raise car prices for all of us.
Canadian negotiators and the people making these decisions, what are they thinking about? How are they factoring that into their calculus?
Well, I think a smart strategy absolutely incorporates that into the reality here. We don't know first of all, if at all the government will retaliate, but if it does, if Canada retaliates, what that looks like. But in the past, Canada has actually yielded very successful results with a retaliatory package that targets specific American goods. It was done very successfully in 2017, 2018 during past NAFTA into CUSMA talks between Canada and the U.S. to try to get the U.S. to eventually lift steel and aluminum tariffs at that time. And those affected things like playing card manufacturers in various communities and states. Again, bourbon distillers, some of these other folks affected by provincial liquor bans too. So between all of those elements, that has at times, both economic impact, but very real political effect in terms of local jobs being affected, their elected representatives being, concerned and exercised and voicing those concerns to the administration.
And there is a pressure point. U.S. midterm elections are coming. Targeted tariffs hit specific towns, and specific members of Congress feel it.
Looking at your toolbox of leverage that you can potentially apply to the U.S., you do have a domestic political situation in with the American midterm elections coming up. How relevant is that, do you think, for the Canadian negotiators and the people making these decisions? What are they thinking about? How are they factoring that into their calculus?
Some want to go further. Ontario's premier has floated withholding potash and oil to, in his words, dismantle the U.S. response.
Options, as well as new and extra supports for these affected Canadian sectors that are going to be hard hit.
And the American threat, which was made repeatedly in the last few days, don't retaliate. How do you process that if you're in the PMO right now?
Yeah, that's a hard one because they have made pretty clear that they don't want to see retaliatory action from the government of Canada. But on the flip side, the president generally responds best of all of the responses to positions of strength. And it's pretty hard for Canada to simply let these 50% tariffs be introduced and calmly take that as a fact of life. Everyday Canadians will also be looking for that kind of action. So I think
a 50% tariff, Canadian officials say, would violate the very trade deal Trump himself negotiated.
Canadians, I've heard the Canadian officials say, look, these new tariffs from the Trump administration would violate the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that the president himself put into effect and negotiated in the first term.
Yeah, and that is kind of an interesting wrinkle to all of this because the USMCA did expire early. It's kind of an interesting wrinkle to all of this because the USMCA did expire earlier this year. That actually allows the current provisions of the USMCA to take hold for a number of years, but it did open the doors for renegotiation. And you see in the fact that the U.S. is posturing with this 50% tariff against Canada, but not against Mexico, that the U.S. probably would prefer, at least under this Trump administration, to go with some sort of bilateral agreement with our neighbors to the north and then a separate bilateral agreement with our neighbors to the south, as opposed to one overarching North American agreement. Now, when it comes to the question of where we are with the negotiations with Canada, it seems like the Canadian press is certainly on the table. But as we've seen in previous episodes, the U.S. and President Trump seem to have a particular bone to pick with Canada.
Yeah, and the worry here, Brian, overall here is that tariffs will somehow...
Every scenario runs through the same wild card, the president himself. He has backed off before, and he is the ultimate decider.
Those tariffs on Canada, but it's really not clear what will transpire.
And I mean, if you were a betting person, how optimistic are you that this is going to get done by that Wednesday deadline?
I think 50-50 at this point. That's really, I am encouraged by the fact that Canada is still very physically present in Washington right now, having these live conversations. But the biggest, most unpredictable variable is the president himself, who still has yet to our knowledge, directly weigh in.
I heard from Donald Trump, and he's the ultimate decider in all of this, I guess.
Well, absolutely. And today the prime minister said that he does anticipate speaking to the president between now and Wednesday, which I take to mean tomorrow perhaps, or early Wednesday. But ultimately, they are the deal makers. They are the decision makers, especially.
So here is the map. Way 1, a pause and more talks. Way 2, a deal that lifts the tariffs. Way 3, no deal and the 50% hits. And whatever happens, Canada has a toolbox and a real dilemma about using it. So which way do you think it ends? A pause, a deal, or the full 50%? And if it hits, should Canada fight back or hold fire? Tell us below and subscribe for clear, fair coverage of every hour of this.